So Sadik Kassim is a scientist specializing in cell and gene therapies. He is the scientific news editor of the international scientific journal titled Human Gene Therapy, which was recently selected as one of the most influential journals in medicine over the last 100 years. Dr. Kassim is the founder of the Islamic Message Foundation of New Orleans, Louisiana, and has spoken at numerous universities, as well as Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and Hindu organizations around the world. Without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Sadik Kassim with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We also have a special guest with us tonight from Najaf, Sheikh Azhar Nasir. If you guys can please welcome him with 3 loud salawats ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you. Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. لقد جاءت رسل ربنا بالحق ونودوا أن تلكم الجنة ورثتموها بما كنتم تعملون. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا وحبيب قلوبنا المصطفى الأمجد أبا القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين. أما بعد، يقول الله في المحكم بعد أن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. واتلوا عليهم نبأ الذي آتيناه آياتنا فانسلخ منها فاتبعه الشيطان فكان من الغاوين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. My dear brothers and sisters, respected scholars, Samahat Sayyid Qazwini, I welcome you all with a loud Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The New York Times recently had a very interesting article. The title of the article was God and Americans. God and Americans. And they were talking about religious belief or the belief in God in the United States. There are actually some very interesting numbers and statistics in this article. They found that on average, 93% of Americans say they believe in God or in a higher power. 93%, meaning the majority of Americans believe in God. However, the problem comes in that the reason that most Americans don't go to church or don't go to synagogues or don't go to mosques is because religion is complicated. And so what the New York Times was advocating is that we need a Steve Jobs of religion. Steve Jobs, as you'll know, is the man who invented the iPhone. And the reason that Steve Jobs is viewed as a genius is because he made using the telephone and using mobile technology intuitive, meaning you don't have to think about it. You just simply pick it up and you'll notice that you have a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old easily using it. The New York Times is advocating we need someone like Steve Jobs to simplify the religion. And they go on further by saying, like Mr. Jobs' creations, this new way would be straightforward and absolutely intuitive, meaning you don't have to think about what it takes to be religious. Rather, it would be highly interactive. I imagine a religious space that celebrates doubt, encourages experimentation, and here's the key point, allows one to utter God without embarrassment. Meaning, most Americans today believe in God or believe in a higher power, but the problem or the disconnect comes in the actual connection with God. Because it's an embarrassment to say you're a religious individual, and it's embarrassing to say you go to church. When I was reading over this article, I thought, subhanAllah, this is ripe ground, this is fertile territory for Islam. For as you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ وَلَكِنْ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. When we talk about intuitive religions or when we talk about intuitive systems of belief and practice, the most intuitive and the most straightforward system of belief that there is in existence is Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, فَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا, to the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what I want to do tonight is I want to articulate some of the barriers that prevent individuals from connecting with Allah, some of the barriers that prevent us on a daily basis from connecting with Allah. And by discussing some of these challenges, we can better be able to spread and discuss the religion of Islam. For as I mentioned, 93% of Americans believe in God and believe in a higher authority. They just want a system that enables them to express that belief in a way that's not embarrassing. And so tonight, inshallah, we'll identify 4 barriers that prevent individuals and prevent us on a daily basis from connecting with Allah, with the main objective of being able to propagate the religion of Islam as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the prophets and the Ahlul Bayt have taught us. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Before I get into the discussion, I want to clarify a term. The term deen is often translated as meaning religion. Meaning if you look at the Quran, or if you look at a translation of the Quran, or if you look at the translation of the Arabic language, you'll often find that whenever the word deen is written, it's often translated as religion. However, this is an overly simplistic definition of the word deen. The word deen is a complicated and multifaceted word that has multiple different meanings. It comes from the root word in Arabic. And by the way, if you want to understand the meaning of something in Arabic, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a wonderful system where you can look at the root of the word to get a better understanding of the meaning of the word. Most words in Arabic have a 3 or 4 letter root word that tells you something about the meaning. The word deen comes from the root word dan. The word dan can be found in multiple numerous words. For example, dain, which means debt. It also comes in the word submissiveness, meaning if you submit to something, you say dana leh, meaning you submit it to something. Also, the city of Medina. Medina comes from the root word dan, which is also coming back to the word deen. Meaning the word deen is not simply, cannot simply be translated as religion, but rather according to Islam and according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word deen implies a fundamental system that unifies the entirety of existence. Meaning deen is not simply the religious practice or the connection to God, but rather it's the unifying system that connects the entirety of this universe. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Naml, وَلِلَّهِ يَسْجُدُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ طَوْعًا وَكَرْهًا وَظِلَالَهُمْ بِالْغُدُوِّ وَالْآصَالِ. Everything in this universe, everything from the animals to the plants to the stars to the planets, everything in the universe bows down and submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. طَوْعًا وَكَرْهًا, meaning willingly and without willingness, meaning voluntarily and involuntarily. And even their shadows submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So within this context, the word deen means the universal operating system that enables this universe to exist. Now, when we talk about deen, deenul Islam, what we're talking about, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي وَرَضِيتُ لَكُمَ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about is the system of submission that enables you to connect to the greater system of Allah. So this is a concept that we need to understand. You have the great deen of Allah, which is the operating system of the universe. And then you have the deen of Islam, the small deen, which is the system that enables mankind to connect to the greater system of Allah. Meaning the religion of Islam is a system that enables mankind to, like the plants and the animals and what have you, connect to the greater system. Deen is not a man-made construct. Religion is man-made. Christianity Christianity is man-made, Hinduism is man-made, Judaism is man-made. Deen, however, is something that comes from a greater entity, from a greater source. So that's something that we need to clarify here. When I'm talking about deen here, we're not talking about the same concept of religion that's often translated as religion. So having said that, what are the barriers that prevent mankind from connecting to the deen of Allah, to the system that operates the universe? What are the barriers? We're going to discuss 4 of the barriers here tonight. The first barrier is the lack of willingness on behalf of mankind to actually connect to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it very clearly in Surah Al-Baqarah. لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. There is no compulsion in the following of religion. قد تبين الرشد من الغي. Because the truth will always be differentiated from the darkness. فمن يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى. The first step to connect to the deen of Allah is to become a good kafir. Yeah, let me repeat that again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Ayatul Kursi is telling us that in order to connect with Allah, first and foremost, you have to be a kafir. What's Allah talking about here? Allah says, فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوَثْقَى. In order to connect with Allah, you have to deny everything that is not Allah. And that's the word kufr. You see, many of us, we just simply practice the religion of Islam, but the foundation of our religion is built on a bedrock of contamination. It's like, for example, if you ever notice the farmer doesn't just simply come in and plant seeds in the ground. Rather, the first step that the farmer does is he prepares the ground. He gets rid of the stones, he gets rid of the weeds, he prepares the ground. And that's the same thing that you need to do with your religion. Before simply believing in Allah, you need to clear the ground. You need to prepare the ground by eliminating everything which is not Allah. If you simply just throw the seed of Islam in a garden that's filled with hypocrisy, that's filled with lying, that's filled with cheating, that's filled with thievery, Islam is not going to grow because it's not a beneficial environment. So the first step towards connecting with Allah is to deny everything which is not Allah. فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ. And then believing in Allah. First, you have to purify in order to connect. And that's the purpose of the month of Ramadan, you'll notice. By purifying yourself, by spiritually denying yourself the lower temptations, you're connecting and elevating yourself towards Allah. You'll notice the shahada. The first part of the shahada is La ilaha. There is no God except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Illallah. So the first part towards connecting with Allah is to deny everything which is not Allah. That's why I always, joke around with my friends and I tell them that, if you look at it, an atheist is essentially half a Muslim, if you think about it. Because an atheist has said the first part of the Shahada. He's saying La ilaha. He's saying that there is no God. The only thing that the atheist needs to do is he needs to go to the next step and say Illallah, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the foundation of Islam and the foundation of connection depends on us denying everything which is not Allah. And when we don't deny those things, it becomes difficult to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that's the foundation that we've been built on. And by the way, this is proving to be true on a scientific basis. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Hujurat says, ولكن الله حبب إليكم الإيمان وزينه في قلوبكم وكره إليكم الكفر والفسوق والعصيان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made you love Iman. حبب إليكم الإيمان وزينه في قلوبكم. And He's made it prized in your hearts. And He makes you hate the kufr and the fusuq and the isyan and the denial, which the Sayyid was talking about earlier. Mankind is built on a foundation of wanting to connect to God. Mankind is built on a foundation of wanting to be good. Mankind is built on a foundation of wanting to elevate themselves, but it's the society which brings mankind down. Now, getting back to modern science, there's a scientist over at Yale University. His name is Paul Bloom, and he studies moral psychology. His question is man inherently good or is man inherently evil? What he's found is that mankind is inherently good, meaning children at a very young age, they have this temptation. They can differentiate between good and bad. This is the foundation of mankind. And this is proven in Islam when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that mankind was created on fitrah. Fitrah means that mankind is created inherently good. Modern science is proving to us that mankind is built on this foundation, but over time they tend to be dissuaded or taken away from this temptation. So the first barrier that prevents mankind from connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the lack of desire to connect to something that's higher than them. The lack of desire to connect with something which is greater than themselves. Now, what's the second thing that prevents mankind from connecting to Allah or from connecting to the deen of Islam? The second thing is distractions from our very own essence, meaning distraction in daily life. And this, by the way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that this is the methodology of the shaitan. The shaitan tells Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَأُزَيِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَأَغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. The methodology that shaitan uses to take us away from Allah is by distraction. لَأَغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. أَغْوِيَنَّهُم means to distract them from their true essence. The way that shaitan operates is that he distracts mankind from their fundamental essence, and he makes mankind take on things which are completely irrelevant to their existence. For example, in modern times, we notice that mankind is tempted by numerous things, and this is something that we've noticed in modern Muslim societies as well. Take a look at, for example, pornography. You know, the other day I was reading a report that if you look at the Google Trends statistics of the countries that download the most amount of pornography per capita, that the top 5 countries are all Muslim countries: Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Top 5 countries in the world that are, in terms of Google statistics, downloading pornography. This is the type of distraction that shaitan is creating for humanity. Rather than connecting with Allah, he's creating these trivialities and distractions that cause mankind to connect to something base and something which is bringing them down to their basic animal self. And this isn't just a problem in the Muslim countries. Here in America, we have this problem in Muslim societies and marriages. I know of many marriages that are breaking apart or disintegrating because the husband is downloading pornography and is completely avoiding his wife and ignoring his wife. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the methodology of the shaitan, لَأُزَيِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَأَغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ, that shaitan will make these things look tempting to us, make these things look beautiful to us, and make us distracted. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about. Distracting us from our essence. Distracting us from our true essence. So the second barrier that prevents mankind from connecting to Allah is this distraction. Distraction with the trivial matters of the world. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لَا يَسْتَوِيَ الْخَبِيثُ وَالطَّيِّبُ وَلَوْ أَعْجَبَكَ كَثْرَةُ الْخَبِيثِ. The evil things and the good things are not equal, even though the evil things overcome the good things. فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ يَا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. So have consciousness in Allah so that you may succeed. The second thing that Allah is talking about here in terms of a barrier to mankind is distractions. The reason that Americans aren't connecting to Allah and the reason that Muslims aren't connecting to Allah is because we're distracted. We're distracted by a lot of trivialities and a lot of insignificant things. Eliminate the distractions, and this enhances your ability to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The third cause that prevents mankind from connecting to Allah or from connecting to the deen is ignoring the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You notice in the Quran, Allah doesn't really make a lot of arguments for His existence. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets His creation speaks for His existence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمَ الْحَقِّ أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِي بِرَبِّكَ أَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. We shall reveal to them our signs. سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا. Where will we reveal the signs? فِي الْآفَاقِ, in the outer reaches of the universe. وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, and in themselves. حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمَ الْحَقِّ. أَنَّهُ الْحَقِّ. So that it becomes clear to them that this is the truth, this is the way. أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِي بِرَبِّكَ أَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. Is it not enough that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a witness over everything? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the argument for Allah exists in the creation. But the problem is that the majority of mankind and the majority of humans ignore the signs of Allah. They don't reflect. They don't think and they don't ponder upon the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this causes mankind to be distracted and avoid connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And mankind tends to create artificial arguments. So for example, I'll give you a few stories from the Ahlul Bayt and how they discussed with the atheists. There's a tremendous amount of hadith and stories in the hadith literature of Ahlul Bayt that discusses the interaction of the imams with numerous atheists. Among them was Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, there are numerous occasions when atheists came to him and tried to debate him. There's an instance one time when there was a famous atheist in Medina named Abu Shakir. Abu Shakir came to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq and said, "Oh Imam, show me Allah." He says, "You say Allah exists, show me Allah. Where is Allah?" Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq smiles and he says, "You want to see Allah? Look up at the sun." Abu Shakir says, "How can I look up at the sun? I'll become blinded." Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq says to the man, How do you want to look at Allah when you can't even look at His creation?" Meaning, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq didn't spend time trying to prove the existence of Allah. Rather, he used logic and said to the man, "You want to look at the Creator. How can you look at the Creator when you can't even look at the creation?" Meaning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than our perception and greater than our senses. Mankind often falls into this false equivalence. How can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exist? We can't even see Him. But the reality is the majority of our existence is unseen. The 2009 Nobel Peace Prize was awarded for something called dark matter and dark energy. Let me tell you a little about dark matter and dark energy. Everything in the universe is created out of atoms. So you see this table, this lectern, this microphone, myself, the chairs that you're sitting on, all of these are created out of atoms. The atom is the smallest particle which we can measure, specifically electrons and neutrons. Everything in the universe is made out of atoms. So the planets are made out of atoms, the stars are made out of atoms, we're made out of atoms. Now, if you take all of the atoms in the universe and add them together, they only compose 4% of the universe. Meaning right now, modern science can only measure 4% of the universe. The rest of the 96% of the universe is completely unmeasured and completely unseen. And we call this dark matter and dark energy. We don't even know how to measure it. We don't even know how to see it. But we know that it has to exist. Because for the 4% of the universe that we know of to exist, you have to have this dark energy and dark matter. Meaning that the majority of our existence is occurring in this complete darkness and this complete absence. We can't even measure it. When Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq is telling this individual, Abu Shakir, look at the creation, and the man can't even look at the sun, this is exactly what Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq is saying. Right now, as humans, using our best scientific tools, we can only look at 4% of the universe. 96% of the universe is completely shut off from our senses, completely immeasured. Think about that. Think about how insignificant that makes us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هَلْ أَتَى عَلَى الْإِنسَانِ حِينٌ مِّنَ الدَّهْرِ لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا. We think we're great and powerful. But the reality is, when you look at our contribution to the overall universe, it's nothing. It's insignificant. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. The third barrier that prevents mankind from connecting to Allah is the ignorance or the manipulation of the signs of Allah. Meaning, if you truly reflect on the creation, you'll come to the conclusion that there has to be a creator. And this, by the way, was seen during the time of Darwin. Many of you know Darwin. He's the man that came up with the concept of evolution by natural selection. And he's often taught in schools and what have you. Darwin looked at the creation and he came to the conclusion that there can't be any God, that it was completely random. And this is the point of view that they often teach in schools. But there's another individual who also came up with the concept of evolution at the same time. There are two people who came up with evolution. There was Darwin and there was another man named Alfred Russel Wallace. They both published on the concept of evolution at the same time. Alfred Russel Wallace came up with a different conclusion. He says nothing in evolution can count for the soul of man. Meaning, if you look at the scientific perspective can't really tell you anything about the soul because evolution cannot explain the soul, the nafs. He says, no, the soul was a separate creation. Alfred Russel Wallace studied evolution by natural selection and came to the conclusion that this sign of evolution is a sign of the natural creation of Allah. Salawat. So the third thing that prevents mankind from connecting to Allah is the manipulation of the signs of Allah and the ignorance of the signs of Allah. And now I want to tell you a little story about one of the individuals who ignored the signs of Allah and how what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about him. And this is the ayah that I started off my discussion with. وَاتْلُوا عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ الَّذِي آتَيْنَاهُ آيَاتِنَا فَانْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا فَأَتْبَعَهُ الشَّيْطَانُ فَكَانَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ. And recite to them the story of the individual to whom we gave our ayahs, to whom we gave our sign. فَاتْلُوا عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ الَّذِي آتَيْنَاهُ آيَاتِنَا. And what did he do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this individual the signs and all of the divine knowledge. فَانْسَلَخَ مِنْهَا. So he ignored them. He completely absolved himself of them. فَأَتْبَعَهُ الشَّيْطَانُ. And when he ignored the signs of Allah, the shaitan came in and started to manipulate his mind, started to manipulate his policies. فَكَانَ مِنَ الْغَاوِينَ. And he became one of the oppressed and darkened individuals. Who is this person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about in Surah 7, Ayah 175? This man is named Bal'am ibn Ba'ura. Bal'am ibn Ba'ura is an individual who existed during the time of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. He lived in modern day Jordan and Palestine. He lived in that area. And so Bal'am was one of the most knowledgeable individuals. Everyone in society, if they had something, if they wanted to understand or to connect to Allah, they would go to Bal'am because Bal'am was one of Allah's chosen people. He was gifted with the signs of Allah. But the king at the time, he knew of Bal'am's powers and he knew of Bal'am's knowledge, but he was afraid of Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So Prophet Musa and Bal'am were both living at the same time. So the king at the time, he came to Bal'am and he said, Bal'am, listen, I'm going to give you some wealth, I'm going to give you some position, some money. All I want you to do is to make dua, to pray against Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Because you have such a connection with Allah, I want you to pray to Allah that He causes Prophet Musa to fail and to cause the children of Israel to fail. So Bal'am, he says, I can't do this. I'm a man of God. I'm a man of religion. Allah has gifted me with these ayahs. But the king came coming back to him and said, just make this prayer and I'll give you anything that you want. All of the wealth and all of the money and all of the positions. Eventually Bal'am succumbed. Eventually Bal'am sold himself for a few dollars, for a few positions in government. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ شِئْنَا لَرَفَعْنَاهُ. We wanted to elevate Bal'am. We wanted to make him one of the chosen people of Allah. وَلَكِنَّهُ أَخْلَدَ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. But Bal'am chose to be a citizen of the earth, chose to lower himself, أَخْلَدَ, lower himself to the earth. وَاتْبَعَ هَوَاهُ. And he followed his own position. He ignored the signs of Allah and he only followed his own philosophy. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on further. He says, Bal'am is like the dog. Let me say that again. Bal'am is like a dog. فَمَثَلَهُ كَمَثَلِ الْكَلْبِ. Bal'am is like a dog. How is Bal'am like a dog? إِن تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْهِ يَلْهَثْ أَوْ تَتْرُكُهُ يَلْهَثْ. If you carry upon him weights, or if you play with Bal'am, he'll pant. Have you ever seen a dog? A dog doesn't care if you feed him or if you ignore him. He'll always be happy to see you. He'll always stick his tongue out and pant. A dog is sort of just following his intuitions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying Bal'am is like the dog. If you ignore him or if you play with him, he's going to react the same. فَمَثَلَهُ كَمَثَلِ الْكَلْبِ إِن تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْهِ يَلْهَثْ أَوْ تَتْرُكُهُ يَلْهَثْ ذَلِكَ مَثَلُ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا. And the nation that denies our signs are like dogs. The nation that ignores the signs and the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are like dogs. فَاقْصُصِ الْقَصَصَ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So remind them of these stories so that they may think and ponder. We have to think to ourselves in our modern day Muslim communities. Are we like Bal'am? Are we like dogs? Have we ignored the signs of Allah? Have we ignored the signs and the directions of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt? Have we just become like dogs in that we follow our base instincts? When we're hungry, we eat. When we're tired, we sleep. When we'd like to procreate, we procreate. Are we just like the dog? Or do we have higher elevation or higher aspirations? Do we want to become closer to Allah, or do we want to become closer to the earth? So the third thing that prevents mankind from connecting to the deen of Allah is the ignorance of the signs of Allah and the manipulation of the signs of Allah. We have it in the example of Darwin in modern times, where he ignored that evolution cannot explain for the creation of the soul. And we have it in ancient times in examples like Bal'am. The question is, do we want to become like Bal'am, or do we want to become like the Prophet? Salawat. So the three things that we've talked about so far are: number one, lack of a desire to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number two, the lack or the ignorance of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number three, distractions in our daily life that prevent us from connecting to Allah. What's the fourth cause and the final cause that prevents us and prevents Americans and prevents humanity from connecting to Allah? The fourth cause, I would say, is a lack of understanding regarding the nature of Allah, regarding the nature of the Creator, that results from a trivialization of the divine system of Allah. I'll go back to this article from the New York Times and I'll close here. The article concludes by saying, put bluntly, God is not a lot of fun these days. And this is a direct quote. And why is God not a lot of fun? Because many of us don't view religion so generously. All we see is an angry God. Most people, when they think of God, they think of an angry man sitting up in the clouds, just wanting to punish humanity. All we see is an angry God. He is constantly judging and smiting, and so are his followers. No wonder so many Americans love the Dalai Lama, because he laughs often and he laughs well. The fourth reason that most of humanity doesn't connect with the deen of Allah is because they trivialize the nature of the Creator of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning, oftentimes humanity views God as this judging, smiting, punishing figure. Whereas in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ ادْعُوا اللَّهَ أَوْ ادْعُوا الرَّحْمَنَ أَيًّا مَا تَدْعُوا فَلَهُ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. Say, call him Allah or call him the most merciful. Whatever you call him, to him belong the most beautiful names and the most beautiful titles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the thing that enables us to understand the true nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is not a judging and is not a punishing figure, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, is an all-encompassing, merciful figure, is an all-encompassing spirit of life. Life itself would not be possible without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does this sound like someone who's a judger, someone who's a punisher, or does this sound like someone who's the most merciful? And I just have to close by mentioning this story. My offices are in Cambridge. They're in between MIT and Harvard. And a few weeks ago, I had and we're involved in some interfaith activities with the Christians and with the Jewish student organizations. So one of the Christian pastors came to my office a few weeks ago, and he was telling me about a recent book that he read about the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I said, well, how did you come across this book on the 99 names of God? He said, after the recent events of ISIS and all of this Islamic terrorism, I decided to actually read what these Muslims are worshiping. How can such a God that's causing these members of ISIS to kill, how can 1.5 billion people follow such a God? So I decided to actually read up on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means to the Muslims. So I picked up a book on the 99 names of God. So I asked this Christian priest, he's a Christian minister for the students at MIT. I asked him, and what did you conclude by reading this book of the 99 names of God? He said, I found them so wonderful that now I've incorporated them into my own prayers. He said, I found the 99 names of God so wonderful that now whenever I pray to God, I say, Ya Rahman, O most merciful, Ya Rahim, Ya Jabbar. I said, subhanallah, here we have a Christian who knows more about the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the majority of Muslims. The way that we connect with Allah is by understanding the essence of Allah. And the way that we understand the essence of Allah is by understanding the character and the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why in a couple of nights, we have a tremendous opportunity to connect with Allah through Dua Joshan al-Kabir, Laylat al-Qadr. On Sunday, I'll be talking about Dua Joshan al-Kabir and why this is called the Dua of the protective shield, and how this is the Dua that will save us and that will protect us and that will enable us to spread the message of Allah so that more individuals like this Christian minister that I interacted with a few weeks ago can connect to the true religion, Dinul Qayyim. وَالْيَوْمَ أَتْمَمْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll conclude with a few ayahs from the Quran that mention the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز العظيم وهو العزيز الحكيم. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to connect to the 99 names of Allah so that we may become messengers for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this country, which is desperately requiring and desperately needing a system to enable them to connect to God. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to become messengers, both in our communities and outside of our communities. رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَّسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا رَبَّنَا وَلَا تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْنَا إِصْرًا كَمَا حَمَلْتَهُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِنَا رَبَّنَا وَلَا تُحَمِّلْنَا مَا لَا طَاقَةَ لَنَا بِهِ واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. صلوات.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Thank you, Dr. Sadik, for that insightful presentation, and thank you all for joining us. If you'd like to stick around for an informal discussion, inshallah, we'll be having it shortly. See you all tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.